Melissa Johnson. Will you tell us what your title is and the organizational unit within ASU that you're...
Definitely, yes. So I'm a web services librarian under ASU Library, and I work within the Discovery Services department of the library, which is under Technology Services. So Discovery Services is responsible for enabling discovery of all of the library resources across our web platforms. So whether that's the library catalog or Discovery System OneSearch, the library website, our library guides, the digital repository, all of those have front-facing platforms that we manage. So I work to do user testing for those platforms, as well as manage the web development projects for the library website.
Wonderful. And all of those tools that you mentioned, those impact like everybody at ASU.
Yes.
I mean, there's like nobody that's not impacted by that.
Yes. So the library is one of those departments that serves over, as much as the ASU student population is growing, that's the amount our customer service base is growing. So it includes all of the students, all of the faculty, and also community members, because as a state institution we also serve our community, so we actually have a lot of grant projects that involve serving the community as well. So it's difficult to even approximate how many people we serve, but it is a lot.
It is, right? And I think, I don't know, sometimes maybe students don't realize how much the faculty use the library services too.
Exactly.
Like all the faculty are using that constantly.
Yes.
And we're always expecting it to be 100% available and 100% accurate and also easy. And like it's always got to be on, and it always has to be right, and it always has to work well.
Yes. And yeah, several factors work into that. So while we do have some control over things like our library website, we are also providing all of these services through other entities. So it's the vendors that we're working with to provide the databases, to provide the search interface for the library catalog. All of it is mediated by a lot of things we don't have control over. So that's always a nice balancing act too.
Yes, that's a nice way to put it. I mean, that's like a really polite way to put it, is how challenging it is to use off-the-shelf software and integrate that all to meet your organizational needs. And you're like right there at the front edge of that.
Yes,
yeah.
It's very challenging, but also very interesting and keeps you on the bleeding edge sometimes and learning every day, and it's invigorating also. So
that's great.
There's trade-offs.
We were talking right before I turned the camera on a little bit about some of the maybe I could call them the myths about project management, and how that seems to like be a hurdle that one has to get over in trying to use project management tools and strategies and processes to use them. There's sort of a myth that's built into them. It's kind of how I would say it. And so can we start back with that? Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, so when I learned I was going to get hired for this position, I definitely went out and bought a few books that were specific to digital project management, interactive project management. I was trying to get my hands on anything that could better prepare me for the types of projects that were going to be specific to this position. So of course, like in every project management book, there's this very nice process laid out, 5 simple steps you can follow that will lead you to project success. And as long as you follow each one of these steps, your project should go fine. The communication, you just have to wrangle every single aspect of the project, and then everything will go fine. So I found that that's a fairly common myth across all of the literature, is that they try to simplify and break down project management into these little bite-sized steps, which is great. But I find that the presentation and the tone of the literature often makes it seem as if, as long as you just follow this simple process, you'll end up being successful in your project. And I think anyone that has managed projects, which is everyone, because we are all project managers, will find that it's just not so cut and dry, it's not so straightforward. So I think, me personally, it would be more helpful if some of the literature would acknowledge more of a cyclical or non-linear bouncing back and forth among lots of these bite-sized piece steps, because I think that would be a more true representation of how projects tend to go.
Exactly. And like what the project manager is experiencing in the realness of their project doesn't seem to match up with any phase or step or situation that's in, like, it's not like you could pick up any of those books and hold it up and go, okay, this is where I'm at. All right, now here's what I need to do next, because none of them match the messiness of the real project.
Yes, and even, they do say you need to, at the outset of the projects, try to identify any contingency plans or plan for anything that could go wrong, but there's so little instruction about, typical types of things that could go wrong and types of training or preparation you could undertake that would actually prepare you for these typical things that go wrong. So if it's an administrator who changes their mind in the middle of the project, or if a resource you had at the outset of the project is suddenly taken away, like, there's typical things that would go wrong. It's just I don't find much in the literature about typical steps a project manager could take to prepare for those things. They say you should do that, but then there's no guidance as to how to actually do that.
Right. And some of the, do you have some examples of, so when you found yourself in those situations needing to face specific contingencies, do you want to talk about any of those?
Sure, yeah. I'm trying to think of typical ones that have occurred. So I do a lot of web projects, so digital projects having to deal with online interfaces. And one type of project that often comes up is creating new websites or redoing existing ones. So specifically for this one project I'm thinking of, it was a massive redesign of existing pages that were mainly text, and transforming those into a more visual, interactive, functional experience for the user. And at the outset, trying to manage the scope, we had decided that several different solutions needed to take place, integrating several systems. And so the website piece pretty much got taken care of, but it was supposed to feature some of these other integrations from other systems. And the most difficult part of that was trying to map the systems to how the workflows and processes were being managed by a group completely outside of the technology department. So that's a typical challenge for our department, is to mold our systems to best fit current workflows and processes that are going on, even if those workflows and processes may not be optimal. So in this case, we had a new system. It is very customizable, which is great. But there are certain features that, there's just certain parts of interfaces that you can't customize and personalize to fit a workflow. So there were struggles between the team who was actually doing the work and our technical team to try and find a solution that would be imperfect. Like, there was no ability to get to the perfect solution. So we struggled with, we decided at the outset, we're going to tackle A, B, and C, and that will be the perfect solution for this new interface that we're going to present. It's going to be the greatest, easiest, most efficient experience for the user. And then you actually start getting into the details and working with people and processes outside of your control that significantly alters and makes the original plan undoable. So I guess when those realizations occur, I typically default to like the soft people skills that tend to be one of my strengths. So trying to bring people into the room, mediate conversations, see where there's room to wiggle, where there isn't room to wiggle. And in this case, attempts at doing that just didn't work out. Like, there were plenty of meetings with all the right people in the room, but the communication just wasn't happening.
So let me interrupt for a second. So the focus, you were trying to like renegotiate the requirements? Is that what you were, like you had to go all the way back to and say, okay, we're not going to be able to meet these requirements.
Right.
So with the current limitations on the project. Like if you had unlimited time and unlimited money, anything's doable, right?
Sure.
But you weren't going to be able. So the strategy was to get all the right people involved, all the stakeholders involved.
Yes.
And come to the table and have everybody realize that the original requirements were not going to be able to be met.
Correct.
So let's talk through those and figure out what are reasonable requirements, revised ones, within the existing constraints that have occurred on the project.
Yes, that was a perfect summary.
Oh.
Thank you. Good job. I know I'm speaking very vaguely and broadly, but yes, that was a great summary. Yes, and I feel like that is also kind of a myth that is involved not only in project management, but kind of meeting management in general. You know, if you just get all the right people in the room, you'll come to the right solution and then you can move forward. It's just a matter of getting the right people in the room, and that's just not always the case. I've found. I guess I'm coming off somewhat cynical, but I guess these are just some of the realities of project management that I've experienced so far. Sometimes the people who are in charge of certain components of the project don't have the expertise, time, resources necessary to come up with the solutions. So even though the right person might be in the room, the exact right person, it's not going to necessarily be the solution. It's not going to get rid of the roadblock that's in the way of getting the project to move forward.
Right. And then there's, you know, there can be conflicting or competing priorities based on political, you know, agendas within the different units within any organization, whether that's a small organization or a large organization. The individuals who are involved in any particular project typically have multiple agendas that they're trying to accomplish by being involved in a project.
Yes.
And where your project, as the project manager, where and how that fits in for somebody else's, you know, career agenda or whatever they're trying to accomplish, you know, that impacts your ability to be successful with your project, but it's not something that you have direct control over.
Certainly, yes. I think that's a great point. So again, at the outset of the project, you're supposed to define success criteria, and these are things that are generally agreed upon that would indicate that the project is successful at the end of the project. But I think it's so hard, and I feel like those are typically defined from a very strategic, sort of checklist, tangible sort of perspective, measurable perspective, but people operate, like you said, they have multiple things that they're trying to get out of the project and multiple ways they're trying to contribute and different frames from which they see the world. So often focused on things that are measurable, so especially in my area. So for us, success criteria for things that are measurable are often things like increasing the number of visitors to a web page, decreasing the bounce rate, decreasing the amount of time it takes for someone to go through a process to complete a task. So all of these, you know, more measurable, tangible things, but it's so difficult sometimes to measure maybe how we are reframing the library to be more representative of our values, or how we're aligning with the ASU charter, things like that that are often can be much more important than the amount of time it takes, the amount of time someone's spending on a webpage.
Exactly. Yeah. I like the way you said that. The meaning systems that people are operating with when you have all those stakeholders together, like you don't have direct access to their meaning system, like the value they're placing on these different things. And then
exactly. Yes.
So and if we all knew that that's what we're trying to accomplish, like that's the real success criteria.
Yes.
Then we all would have a better sense of the options available for achieving that success, because there's a lot more options available for achieving that success than there is to reduce the number of bounces on a particular website. Like the ways of achieving that are pretty narrowly defined.
Exactly.
But like you said, demonstrating how the library is significantly contributing to the overall mission of ASU, that's a very different set of things that you're going to be looking at and measuring.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And I'd say for the political frame especially, as a project manager, I feel like you almost have an internal set of success criteria that differs from the ones that you are going to write down and share with everyone in the project charter. The project manager tends to get, or at least in my experience, I've tended to be made more aware of several political facets to the projects that I'm asked to manage, because that determines, like you said, the true success of the project. So although on paper we are addressing certain things, the political side always, the political lens, the political frame is always existing kind of invisibly on top. So it's a very interesting and real portion of the project to navigate every time. And I think before I had a formal project management position, I didn't really acknowledge that beforehand. But now, you know, it's regular, it's normal. I know that this is going to come up in every project, so it's just another piece of the puzzle that I have to work with and manage.
Right. That's like a critical piece that a project manager has to be skilled at, how to develop trust between themselves and their client so that they have access to that, at least as much as the client's willing to share with them.
Yes, or able to share with them.
Yes. And that piece, I think there's a lot of advice in the project management literature, like you were mentioning before, that represents that and accepts the reality of it, but brings it into the realm of project management guidance to say you need to do that, because you end up having access to, or at least speculations about, a lot of information that a lot of other people related to the project don't have access to.
Yes.
And so being a trustworthy person that can hold that information and not disclose it is important for your ability to succeed as a project manager.
Definitely, yes. And I'd say that's more acutely felt, the walking on a tightrope, walking on eggshells feeling when you join a new organization or start a new position, because there's so much organizational knowledge you don't have that will just develop over time very informally through interactions, water cooler conversations, just repeated interactions with your team and other people involved in the organization. I would say at the outset it's very difficult to be able to make those kinds of non-obvious decisions without that deep knowledge of people you're working with. So I've been in this current position now a little over a year, and now I know a lot more about how certain people operate, what their values are, how they prefer to communicate, their history with the organization, their history with organizations prior to this one, all of which is, informing their performances in these projects. So now I've learned that if I want content from certain individuals, I need to schedule in-person meetings with them, and I need to be the one writing out the information in a Google Doc, because if I request it from them over email, it's just never going to happen. Or, there's some people who I interacted with when I first started the position who I interact with very differently now that we've been able to establish, like you said, more of a trusting relationship. And the thought that came to mind when you were saying that was, it's a very interesting idea, establishing trust, because that's also not a formal checklisty thing you can really do, but as a project manager it's very important. I find that a lot of my interactions with other people can and often do determine how others interact with me. So you mentioned that project managers are often privy to information due to the role of having to manage and know in depth about a project that other people aren't privy to. So it's situations like that in which you're kind of being tested. So if you're given access to this piece of information, you're being trusted not to share it with others, you're being trusted to use it wisely and responsibly to guide the success of a project and for nothing else. So it's those types of repeated kind of situations and tests that if you pass, that's going to build your trust. But it's lots of these informal interactions that take place through your experience as a new employee becoming a more seasoned employee that really help drive your interactions with stakeholders.
Absolutely. One of the things that some students that take this OGL 320 course struggle with is how to demonstrate that they are a trustworthy person in their project plan.
That's great.
So they're like you can't just walk around telling people, I'm a trustworthy person, trust me, I'm a trustworthy person. Like that's not, like no one would, like if you were looking to hire a project manager to, like say you were going to build an addition on your house and you were interviewing some possible candidates, like the one who walks in and says, hi Melissa, you can trust me, I'm a trustworthy person, right? You're going to look at them
red flags.
Yeah, you're going to say, well, thank you for coming, yes. I'll get back to you, right? Like that's not how you do it. So what are the things that indicate or invite? It really isn't indicating, it isn't like stating that one is trustworthy, but it's more of an invitation. I like to think of it. It's the project manager's responsibility to initiate some actions to invite trust. I like to say it. So some of the things that I encourage students to do in their project plan, actually they're required to do this, is in their specifying their subtasks that they have to make up themselves in their project plan. They are to draw on their strengths. So their existing professional skills that they feel are their strengths. And to provide enough detail about how they're going to do the tasks that they're required to do so that their client, can see a little bit about themselves. So it's a reveal. Yes. It's a revealing step where they have to be willing to be vulnerable. The project manager has to be willing to be vulnerable, put themselves out there.
Yes.